We have so far examined 2 of the 3 primary assets. Let us now examine the third, property. Time precludes me from addressing residential, so I will restrict the majority of my remarks to the commercial property sector as represented by the listed property trusts. It has interested me that when I have asked audiences which was the better investment, property or shares, a large number of people believe property to be the superior investment. I find this attitude interesting from a purely academic point of view, as it begs the question: if you could make more money owning property than running a business, why would anyone run a business? As an initial reference point, I want to revisit the cash and shares example. For comparison purposes, I'm going to strip the term deposit out of this chart and replace it with the listed property trust index in exactly the same format, with capital and income separated. Hopefully, this puts paid to any misconceptions people may have about the relative merits of shares versus property. If the mauve bars and line exceeded the yellow, there would be a clear case for all businesses to shut down and simply speculate in property along with us. Surely we must acknowledge that businesses create the wealth that enables them and us to own property. If this were not the case, and property was better than shares, then surely the banks wouldn't lend us money to buy property, but would buy it for themselves, for shareholders. Obviously Mirvac, Stockland, etc. would build houses and apartments and keep them, rather than sell them to you and I to make our fortunes. The extraordinary lack of critical assessment of property remains a source of amazement to me. However, back to the chart. This is the best example I can imagine of the yield trap. Over the years, I was made very aware of the love affairs retirees had with listed property trusts. They were high-yielding and thus attractive for those seeking income, and were also, quote, property, and thus added an additional layer of emotional comfort. Hopefully, recent events will have disabused people of that notion, but I suspect old habits die hard. Let me repeat an earlier question. Which income stream would you like to struggle by on for the rest of your life? Let's now apply the yield calculation and plot them, as we did earlier, with cash and shares. Based on yield alone, which investment would you have preferred? Here is the yield trap in all its glory. Choosing your source of income based on the yield available has always been fraught with danger. Let's now go back to the original chart and explore why this picture looks as it does. I want to remind you of some of my earlier comments. The reason the yield on listed property trusts is high is simply a function of the fact that the capital value, the mauve line, is well below the top of the income bar. Conversely, with shares, the yield is low because the capital value is almost level with the top of the income bar. What makes the whole equation even more tragic for those sucked in by the high yields on offer is the fact that listed property trusts have a 100% payout ratio. They have no retained earnings, and the vertical mauve bars represent 100% of the income generated. The yellow bars, as I indicated earlier, represent only around 50% of company profits. As a final coup de grace, I would alert you to the fact that the All Industrials Index, represented by the yellow line, includes the Listed Property Trust Index, i.e. it's an integral part of the Industrials Index you see here. If therefore, as an investor, I choose industrial shares and no listed property trusts, I want you to imagine what happens to the yellow line if you take the mauve line out of it. This is why industry is far better served getting rid of the property off its balance sheets and investing the money back into their businesses. This is why Mirvac and Stockland will never own what they build, but continue to sell it to property speculators.